really channeling my inner Dale Kingsmill with this video. Hey everyone, I'm Greg, this is the Arcane Opal, and welcome to my hobby Hobble, where I share my experiences navigating the tabletop hobby. Today, as part of KRAKEN Week, I'm taking two monsters from Greek mythology and transforming them into an encounter for any tabletop role-playing game. For the unaware, KRAKEN Week is an open invite YouTube event organized by both Ginny D and Pointy Hat, which invites YouTubers to talk about their own nautical ideas for tabletop role-playing games. And I've decided to contribute to KRAKEN Week this year by providing a random encounter featuring two monsters from Greek mythology known as Scylla and Charybdis. Now, both Scylla and Charybdis are iconic members of Greek mythology in their own right. They show up in various famous Greek stories, including the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and the Argonautica. However, I feel they're not as iconic as more generic monsters found in Greek mythology. And I think part of the reason for this is while they are mainstays in various Greek myths, they are very situational. They only show up in one particular area of the world of Greek mythology, and despite them being named, we're not given as much detail as you might expect. Off the top of your head, you could easily name mermaids, sirens, harpies, etc. as being famous members or spin-offs of original Greek myths, but both Scylla and Charybdis, in spite of their influence, feel somewhat obscure by comparison, at least in the mainstream. So yes, from a mainstream perspective, Scylla and Charybdis might not be as iconic as more generic monsters in Greek mythology, but that just means that it makes it easier for me to toy with them for KRAKEN Week, so here's how I change those myths up. Out of these two Greek monsters, Scylla definitely has the most details and descriptions, so we're starting with her. Although her appearance changes between myths as well as pop culture adaptations, commonly, Scylla is described as having the appearance of a woman from the upper half, while the bottom half is much more monstrous. Commonly, her bottom half is described as being a mass of snaky tendrils that end in snapping jaws. Considering that Scylla's bottom half reminds me significantly of the Hydra, I'm keeping that in mind for my redesign. I'm also pulling in additional inspiration from other Greek monsters, including the Sirens. In the Odyssey, Odysseus and company encounter a troop of sirens right before they encounter Scylla and Charybdis, so I like the idea of Scylla being the mother of these sirens. And depending on which period of Greek mythology we're talking about, sirens are either depicted as being much like the harpies or like the mermaids, so I'm going to incorporate aspects of both into my version of Scylla. My version of Scylla is going to have a big pair of wings so she can fly overhead and attack the party from above the ship. This is going to give Scylla a lot more mobility when compared to Charybdis. Furthermore, Scylla's origin does have a couple different versions of myth surrounding it, but there is one that's very popular involving the sorceress Circe. In this version of the myth, Glaucus was in love with Scylla, and this immediately drew the ire of Circe because Circe was in love with Glaucus. So as vengeance, Circe poisons Scylla and transforms her into the monster that she is commonly known as. This is doubly ironic because in the Odyssey, Circe is the one who warns Odysseus about Scylla. This transformation of beauty into ugliness is seen elsewhere in Greek mythology, most commonly with the Gorgons and most famously with Medusa. So while I don't want to give my version of Scylla a Medusa glare, I do like the idea of her transforming her face into something so hideous that it fills those who see her with fear. And that takes us to Charybdis, who tragically does not have as much beautiful detail to work with. Charybdis is rarely spoken about unless it's with relation to Scylla, since they both live in the same area of the Wandering Rocks. Across mythology, Charybdis is almost exclusively described as being a giant whirlpool which appears within the Wandering Rocks. This is because the monster lies beneath the waves and is sucking in tons of water into her gullet in order to try and capture some food. But there's been embellishments in popular culture, with Charybdis now gaining giant gnashing teeth and tentacles, effectively becoming a Greek mythology version of the Kraken, which is very fitting for KRAKEN Week. I do think this adaptation as a Kraken-like beast is perfectly serviceable, but I want to add some extra embellishments. I namely want to give my version of Charybdis some kind of long-range attack, so I'm going to allow it to belch out bolts of lightning in the form of storm clouds. This ability is also given to the Kraken from 5th edition, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? For this random encounter to fulfill the idea of the phrase between Scylla and Charybdis, I've made a lot of these changes with the ideas of these two creatures working together to try and capture their meals. Charybdis is effectively going to act as a giant blender that destroys everything in its path, and Scylla is going to try and push all of the possible victims towards Charybdis. All the while, Scylla will be trying to pick off members of the crew with her snapping maws, so that way she gets some food in her before Charybdis eats up the rest of the ship. So with all these ideas in mind, I created the stats, finished up all the artwork, and assembled the final supplement. Now, the main focus of this combat encounter is to gamify the phrase between Scylla and Charybdis, which, fun fact, is the predecessor to the phrase between a rock and a hard place. This phrase is very telling of these two monsters' roles in Greek mythology. They are effectively an obstacle for our heroes to overcome on their various journeys. Now I'm adapting these myths as follows. Ideally the party will be sailing on a ship and they will randomly encounter the Wandering Rocks, so named because they don't stay in any particular place, hence Wandering Rocks. So I feel that the best way to gamify these two monsters of Greek mythology is to effectively recreate the encounter found in the Odyssey. In that story, Odysseus is told directly he has to sail between Charybdis and Scylla, and he and his crew have a greater chance of surviving Scylla because they're number 1, more likely to fight her off, and number 2, more likely to satiate her hunger when compared to that of the churning whirlpool summoned by Charybdis. So as I concocted these system-neutral stats, that is what I kept in mind. I made Charybdis effectively a giant bag of hit points that proves to be a giant obstacle that needs to be avoided at all costs and tries to suck people closer to its gaping maw. Meanwhile, my version of Scylla is much more mobile and has extra help in combat thanks to all those snapping heads she has as a lower half of her body. But she is also, consequently, more easy to fight off, much like in the Odyssey. The end result of this encounter is very simple. You have a ship that is trying to avoid being pulled into the whirlpool of Charybdis' gaping hungry maw, all the while trying to fight off Scylla. And with all this design work done, that means that you can get this free supplement now! You can download the supplement for free on my itch.io by following the links in my description. But of course, if you'd like to help support the show, you can also buy a physical version of the supplement by following the links in my description to the Grego Movie Rants online store. And if you want to help support us for free, you can do so by dropping a like or dislike, commenting down below, subscribing to both the Arcane Opal and Grego Movie Rants, and following us on the social medias, even though they all seem to be on fire right now. While you wait for our next broadcast, be sure to help support everybody else who's participating in Kraken Week, and until next time, may fortune find you in all of your adventures.